Excellent. Well, I'm delighted to have with me for this interview for Chukat, Parashat Chukat, Shifra Chana Hendrie, who is a great hero of ours because she is the four-person to who created these summits, interviewing fascinating people on particularly the issues of Geula. And we've thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's absolutely a pleasure, Shifra, to have you on this podcast on Parashat Chukat. So welcome to the deep dive.
Thank you.
So I'd love you to share with us a little bit about what you're doing lately, and so that the audience can hear from you directly all the exciting things you're working on.
Exciting things, yes. So I have a school. It's called the Gate of Unity School for Spiritual Empowerment, and there I have hundreds and hundreds of hours of archives of text-based classes, mostly Chabad Hasidus, on the topics of Geula, transforming the mind, opening to divine consciousness. I have healings, transformational trainings, and all kinds of things. And I am also pre-recording live classes every month, and then I have a monthly Q&A and a matrix prayer healing that I do for students. I have another program that I'm actually about to close called Soul Infused Influencers. I'm going to offer it one more time, and then we're going to be done with whoever's in there. It's a year-long program. And I'm doing that because I'm writing a book, and I'm feeling like I have to move on and offer some things sometime later on, maybe in the fall, that are more specific, more targeted to specific niches. Anyway, it's a busy time, and more than all of that, or at least underpinning all of that and aligned with all of that, I'm really, really working on breaking through boundaries, because I really feel like that's what it's about now. Like, we're in a matrix, we're in some kind of, I call it sometimes the snow globe. If you know those little toys that you get in stores, you shake it, this little man and a little woman, and with the little houses, and I feel like that's our world. I actually saw that in a vision years ago, like quite a few years ago, when I was in a healing session somebody was doing for me. It was so strong, and it hasn't left me. And it's so clear every time we have a new opportunity to learn something, to see something that we really didn't see. Usually that happens when we get challenged, right? And we fall, or we go into despair or terror or whatever, and then somehow something opens up, we have some kind of new insight, and it flips our worldview. And, the more that happens, the more I'm thinking we're in this tiny little bubble, and there's such a vast universe, and that's where we're headed. But I personally feel I have a lot of personal reasons for wanting to be on that quest. And, also I feel like that's my mission. That's all of our mission. If we're tuned into that right now, we're moving backwards through creation, back to source. Wow.
Well, I have a great Akara Tov for you, because you and David were in on our Rosh Hashanah table when we discussed our plans for the year, and I was sharing with you this idea of doing a podcast on the Alshech, and here we are, 8 months later, some 1,000 hours of viewings later, and it's been a miracle and a joy, and it certainly took me out of my comfort zone. So. But I'm absolutely delighted that you're on. And I wanted to just maybe tap into your insight into Miriam, because the main activity of the parasha is the passing of Miriam. And of course, your name is Shifra, and there's a connection between Shifra and Miriam.
Yes.
So tell us what you feel. Tell us about the essence that you sensed that her life was, and what she stood for.
So I have to thank you for this, because I couldn't say no to you. I've said no, you've invited me several times, and I've had like this and that reason for not coming on. And you're so amazing. And I just, I couldn't say no anymore, but I was challenged by the topic, because it's not really my area of expertise. My area of expertise is Hasidus and personal growth, Chabad Hasidus, particularly Geula, So I had to actually do some kind of research and really thinking into what this is all about, which got very exciting, because I wouldn't have done it before. The Rebbe specifically in Sikh of Shalach from, I guess, 1992, one or two, I don't remember, talks about how Miriam led the women out of Egypt, that when they went out, they brought, it's very strange if you think about it, they brought their tambourines and their drums with them. Like, they were going out on foot in this great host, after all of these plagues. And just imagine, you're going into the unknown desert, the wilderness, you're shocked out of your mind, you were in slavery for hundreds of years. What are you going to bring? Musical instruments like tambourine? But they did, and he explained that it's because even in that, in the darkness of exile, in that deep darkness of Gullus, they had absolute bitachon, trust and faith that, as in the Rebbe's words, hine Mashiach ba, that Mashiach is on the doorstep, that it's going to happen at any time. And that is, in my opinion, the essence of Miriam. Miriam also, as I think a lot of people in Israel, a lot of women in Israel who are in the stream of consciousness know that Miriam represents the circle dance, the circle consciousness, which is the consciousness of the future. So Moshe receiving the Torah and then imparting it to if you read Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, you can see the whole sequence of how Moshe taught the Torah. He received the Torah from Sinai, and then he taught it to his brother Aaron, and then they taught it to the elders, and then they taught it to ultimately, through the series of progressive, repetitive teachings to the whole children of Israel, who in turn are holding and incubating and delving into the Torah on behalf of all mankind. So this is a hierarchical, time-bound system that everybody on a lower level, on a receiver level, is looking up to and receiving from, and hopefully, modeling themselves to the best of their ability after someone who is at a higher level. And this is the nature of our human culture, our human way of being in the Torah, and also in other ways, but specifically in the Torah, because we're taught, intrinsically to value people who have more wisdom, people who have more alignment with, with the soul, with God, with divine purpose. So it's a learning mechanism and a striving mechanism where we're always trying to be better, and there's always someone ahead of us who we can look up to. And that's connected with that, the whole Torah tradition has been transmitted from that original days, from past through the generations until this time. And one of the things that's happening that's so amazing is that we're now starting to seek Torah on another level. There's much more of a personal quest. I mean, many people probably have fallen away from that hierarchical platform. And I'm not saying that that's a great thing. Until we're totally evolved, there are things that we are here to learn, need to learn. It's chaos isn't chaos without order, with an underlying higher order, is not a beneficial thing, although sometimes it's necessary. But the point is that Miriam is representing, in her essence, a love of life, a vision of the future. She was the one who would coo to the babies as they were rescuing babies, the midwives, Shifra and Yocheved and Miriam, Shifra and Pua, their Egyptian names. The word pua, the Torah says, is a sound that she would make to comfort them, but it also had to do with bringing them back from a state of almost death, that she was fostering life. She convinced her parents not to be separated, but to have more children. She watched her little brother as he was, floating away in the river, trusting that something would happen and just waiting to see what it was. She was at the sea and sang Shira, sang the song of celebration with the feminine, in the feminine sense, which means that the Shira that she was looking forward to the future now. And that whole consciousness of life, of the preciousness of the individual, and of the future, of the faith and allegiance, belief in the future, and the fostering and the nurturing of the future, and also that expectation, which is it's part of the definition of bitachon, of trust, so powerful. We're guaranteed that if we can have complete bitachon, we will have positively, physically good results. I mean, it's a superpower. And she did, without knowing what was going to happen, she was watching and waiting and trusting. So that's part of the essence of Miriam. And Miriam's consciousness is represented by, corresponds to what I said before, a circle consciousness, which is the world of igulim, the world of circles, which is the stage of tohu, of the worlds of chaos, before we came down, before the God's light comes down into this system of hierarchy, of lights and vessels, of working, of learning, of training, of self-development. There's so much to say about this, but the bottom line, because I know we don't have so much time, is that through the light of Miriam, through the consciousness of Miriam, through the essence, as you say, the energy of Miriam, we are finding our way back as we've learned and developed over millennia, over incarnation after incarnation, over challenge after challenge, persecution after persecution, holding and incubating and absorbing and living and developing the Torah. We are now ready for higher consciousness. That higher consciousness is a direct relationship with God. It's a direct relationship with the soul. It's a direct relationship with the Torah. Yes, after the training and in line with the training that we have done throughout this process, this long, painful, laborious process, supernatural loyalty. That's what the Jews have represented, among many other things. But now we're on the border, or like the Rebbe said once, or more than once, we're on the threshold of Geula. We're like standing there. Then later he said, we're past the threshold, we're in it. But in terms of this consciousness, with this direct consciousness of the unlimited light of God, that's what Miriam's consciousness represents. That is the essence of what is brought down through her. And it's interesting that the well, and this is just, there's so many different interpretations, different faces to Torah. Everybody who learns Torah knows this. But often water represents Torah. Water represents a flow from above to below. So it was in her merit that the Jewish people received this flow. Water is also life-giving, right? Water is, in a sense, the essence of life. Our bodies are mostly water. So, water is flow. So it's very, very apropos, fascinating, and powerful that she represented that ever-flowing stream of precious life-giving waters, because that's also part of her essence. And that life-giving, that source of life on a spiritual level, comes down from the higher worlds into this world of lights and vessels, or the series of worlds that, spiritual and physical worlds, all of the worlds of the multiverse that we and higher beings are living in. All of it is just a piece, a small, again, I'll say snow globe, a small snow globe, outside of which, and really in a subtle, invisible way, inside of which is infinite godliness. And that infinite godliness, that direct, passionate, intimate, personal love that God has for every single human being, really every creature, but specifically every single human being, that is so powerful and so inaccessible in the ordinary flow of events. But Miriam, her essence, gives us access to that.
Beautiful. I love it. What a download. What I wanted to ask you is that one thing we know is that Miriam was a prophetess before Aaron and Moshe were even born. She had that kudos before they came on the scene. And she's always in the background. But if you think about the history of the Jewish people as they went through Egypt and came out, the women are the heroes in that they didn't succumb to Chet HaEgel, the golden calf. They had that bitachon in a much greater level than the men did when we were faced with the splitting of the sea. And I can't help but imagine that most of that credit has to go to the leader of the women, which is Miriam. Do you feel resonating with that?
Well, first of all, the idea that this whole idea of the women, it makes me smile, because when I, years ago, decades ago, when I lived in Crown Heights when the Rebbe first announced that Mashiach is ready to come and it's up to us, it very quickly got to be like, people were walking around quoting "B'schus nashim tzidkani" is in the merit of the righteous women, which everybody has their role to play and everybody's essential. So I have to say that. Also about the leaders, it's really interesting, and this is actually connected to this. It's the Rashi. I think it's Rashi who explains this on Chukat in this week's Parsha, that the idea of the Nasi, because it says in various places in the Parsha that Yisrael said and Moshe said and Yisrael, and Rashi explains that Yisrael is Moshe and Moshe is Yisrael, because the Nasi, Moshe is the Nasi, the leader of the generation, like the central soul of the generation, and every soul is connected to Moshe, and Moshe is connected to every soul, and there's a Moshe in every generation. So yes, it is coming from the leaders, but again, we can look either in a hierarchical sense and say that, we have to follow the leaders, which of course in many ways is a very good idea, and in some ways is not, depending on the leaders. But certainly the great tzaddikim, yes, it's always a good idea. But what do the great tzaddikim tell us? Light yourself up. Don't just be a reflector, be a luminary.
Beautiful.
Transform yourself until the light is shining within you. So Miriam as a leader, 100% has that great soul, that cosmic soul. But we also have, each of us, Kabbalah explains that we each have a spark of that soul within us, and our souls are comprised in the cosmic souls. So there really isn't that separation. It's just we're one, really, honestly. And I think this is part of what Miriam's essence tells us, that we are all one vast superstructure, one organism, one, we started out one, right? Adam, and we're all in that cosmic body, according to the Alter Rebbe. Yes. So,
yet we see all of these beautiful things about Miriam, and yet when you look at the name Miriam, it represents bitterness. How do we fit the bitterness with all this glory that you're describing?
Yeah, so there is something about that. There are a few things to say about that. What I was just reading, that her name, yes, it means bitterness. It also means to lift up, Miriam, and it also means to rebel. And, I was thinking about that, and what occurs to me right now is that these are elements of a transformational process. All of these things are involved in a transformational process. So Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden were receiving the light, right? They were these amazing beings with vast consciousness who could see inside to the letters of creation, who could talk to God casually. No, world of no sickness, no death, no trauma, no fear, no nothing, except that there was a snake. But they were the ultimate reason why the world was created with a snake was because you need that fall, you need that darkness in order to initiate, to have raw material for a transformational process that will, again, move you past the role of a recipient into a role of a luminary. And this is, this is core to the Torah, this is core to the creation story. The moon and the sun were created, two great luminaries in the sky, the moon representing the feminine part of God and the sun representing the masculine, two great luminaries. And the moon complained and said, you can't have two rulers in the same sky. Meaning, I believe you can't have two separate rulers in the same sky. So the moon went down, the Shekhinah went down, became the source of the souls, and the souls were trapped in exile, and first in the physical world and the travails of physicality, the fallen physicality, and then throughout Gullus and exile and all of our experiences. And that's the hierarchical consciousness. But the moon is promised that eventually it will be restored to its full size and its luminosity, its ability to illuminate. And the Rebbe even says that that eventually the moon, when it reaches that state, it won't be receiving from the sun at all. They'll just be two luminaries of one essence. And that's really the source of who we are. And that's, more than anything, I would say that's what Miriam represents. That's what the potential of Miriam represents. And that circle consciousness, as we go back, through the work, through the bitterness of exile and challenges, through the need to the rebellion that makes us us, that makes us real, that makes us, even if rebellion is a negative thing, which it often is, it's coming from a sense of self that Adam and Eve never had. And you need that sense of self, because that sense of self is godly. It's just distorted through rebellion and bitterness. And we learn in the Torah often that medicines, the essence of medicine is usually bitter, right? And bitterness can turn something into a much bigger sweetness. So all of those things really involve, to me, speak to that transformational movement that is taking us to our destiny.
Right. So let's just focus on the parasha a little bit, because there is a crisis happening from when she passed away. The water stopped. You have the image of Moshe and Aaron mourning their sister passing away, and the Alshech brings the midrash that says they notice a huge crowd of people assembling there, and Aaron, in his innocence and Rodef Shalom, Ohev Shalom, perception of the world. He says, oh, look at these tzaddikim and tzaddikot. They've come to obviously give honor and respect to Miriam. And Moshe says, I don't think so, because if they were doing that, they would have come in an orderly fashion, leaders of thousands first, then leaders of hundreds, leaders of 50s, and they're a big rabble. And overhearing that, the Jewish people came over, and while it says in the Pasukim that they approached Moshe and Aaron, when they heard this conversation, they only argued with Moshe, because they kind of saw that Aaron hadn't any negative feelings to them, just Moshe.
Nothing to argue with.
They just want to win. And the Alshech surprisingly says, and I've seen this in other commentaries as well, surprisingly says that the whole crisis of the water was as a result of the lack of respect that the Jewish people had to her passing. And this is explained by the Alshech, because he says that God obviously wanted to show the importance of the tzaddiket by showing the people that the water was due to her merit, and in her passing, obviously the water would dry up. But he only needed to do that for an hour or two. The fact that he extended it for so long was a result of the people not showing their respect properly to Miriam. And you can even read it in the Pasuk. It says, and they came to the Midbar of Tzin and Kadesh, and then Miriam died and she's buried there. That's it. Whereas when Aaron passes away, the whole community came to mourn, and even when Moshe passes away, the community came, and yet here we hear nothing. And so I think that's how they're picking up, the sages are picking up that there wasn't the right respect shown to her. What's your feeling on that?
So I can't speak to the respect, but per se, but what I can say is that it seems like there's a phenomenon, it's related to what you said earlier, that about leaders, and you see this with the golden calf, you see this when Moshe went up and they didn't think he was actually coming down, and they needed a leader, so they made this calf. So it seems that there's a phenomenon, a flaw in the Jewish people, maybe people everywhere, of looking toward a certain person, that the person, or it could be anything, not necessarily a person, but that the person is providing or allowing for or creating something that they need, rather than looking at the person and looking at their qualities and how they related to God, and therefore were the catalyst for God creating what was needed. And that's one of the lessons of Miriam, and one of the lessons of Moshe. Also, it's one of the lessons of life, one of the really important lessons of life, and also has to do with circle consciousness versus the linear consciousness, hierarchical consciousness, that it's really important for us to, yes, emulate, and yes, learn from people, and yes, the greatest respect for, I'm a follower of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I think people don't understand what it's like to be in front of a person who is like Moshe, so you can't not have respect if you are just in that presence and just feel it. And yet at the same time, the purpose of these cosmic souls is to feed us, to imbue us, to transmit to us the qualities that they were born with, or that somehow they were gifted with along the way, because all of us have those in potential. So the people themselves needed to have the faith, not just that they had the faith in Miriam, that with Miriam, the well would be there forever. And if Miriam's gone, the well's gone forever. No, it was a test of faith, that like so many of the tests were, like probably all tests are in a way. And I think that that's one of the reasons why maybe, why Moshe called them rebels, etc., because the same mistake kept getting made. And I guess it's a cosmic one. I guess it's, I don't even guess. I have to speak on our behalf and say, I think it's Reb Levi Yitzchak Barditchev that once complained to God and said, listen, you make a world full of challenges and temptations, and then you put some godliness in a book. Reverse it and see how good we'll be. Give us a world of godliness and put the temptations in a book. You'll have no complaints about us. Anyway, so it's a very difficult, being human is not easy. It's really not easy. God made it an extremely hard game. As one of my teachers once said, it's like having, a mile wide basketball and a centimeter wide hoop 100 feet off the ground, and you're supposed to get that ball through the hoop. Yet we're empowered to do it, but it is, we have to give ourselves, on the one hand, be more ambitious, more rigorous, long, yearn harder and work more and pray more and receive more, trust more. And at the same time, we have to understand that, learn from our mistakes, but we have to understand that it's not an easy job. So I think that's what must be one of the core blockages or the core illusions that God created, that we kept falling into throughout the Chumash, throughout our history, that we keep falling into, depending on, whether it's, even if it's not leaders, it could be, a lawyer, it could be a doctor, it could be a job, it could be could be anything, instead of connecting directly to God. And in fact, the Rebbe talks about the increased challenges of these times, actually in the next Parsha, which I was sort of wishing I was coming at Balak, where he's talking about the transformation that has to happen in these times of increased evil and challenge. The transformation is to move ourselves into that higher consciousness where we connect to God beyond the laws of nature, and where we just have a personal trust and everything that we need is provided for us. So that's the shift that we're here to make now.
Well, it's interesting that, in so many times in these parashot that we're talking now, God has to come to the rescue. His glory appears and stops the antagonistic attack on Moshe. And the Alshech says a very interesting thing. He says that what Hashem was trying to do was to shame the Jewish people into thinking why they were accusing Moshe of bringing them to this desert, this empty desert. The idea was that God might have asked you to bring us to a desert, but not this one. You got us to the wrong place, because there's no fruit, there's no seeds, there's nothing, there's no water. Yeah. And we're going to die like our animals, not even having the Olam Haba. Like animals don't have Olam Haba. That was the allusion to the reference to the animals. But let's talk about this whole idea of the instruction to Moshe to speak to the rock. And you can't help but look at the parallel instructions back in Exodus when they came out of Egypt, and they also similarly had no water, and the Jewish people were complaining. In that situation, God says to Moshe, "Take the rod, hit the rock, and water will come out." And that's what he did. And he did that in the presence of the elders. They witnessed it. And now God wants to elevate that to a whole new level of miracle. Firstly, that Moshe should speak to the rock instead of hitting it. And secondly, that the whole community should witness this miraculous event, not just the elders. And the burning question for anybody reading this is that if that's the case, why did God say to Moshe, "Take the rod with you"? And it said the next pasuk is, and Moshe took the rod just as God commanded him. I mean, it seems to be like a setup. And then you have the situation of the Jewish people provoking and poking at Moshe and insinuating that he could. Why don't you get water out of this rock, then out of this rock? And he's still in Shiva. It's human nature, as you said. It's human nature. I mean, you'd have to be a saint or an angel not to be affected by the pressure that was giving you. And so I just want to touch on this. Why do we think that God asked Moshe to speak and to take the rod at the same time?
Okay, so I'm going to say something that I do not remember. I don't think I saw the source inside, but I heard many times living in Crown Heights, years ago, about this idea. And so I'm just going to repeat it, and apologies for not being able to quote the source, but it's definitely from the Rebbe, or at least I heard it in the name of the Rebbe, that the actual reason why Moshe hit the rock, seems like there are many, but that's the ultimate reason, is because he knew that if he spoke to the rock, it would give water, and the people weren't so willing to listen. So he did not want to make, as the faithful shepherd who gave everything for the Jewish people, he did not want to make the people look worse than a rock. And it's interesting. So he hit the rock because, if you hit someone, they'll listen to you.
You didn't think they were worthy of the miracle of speaking to the rock.
That's one way to put it, but doesn't seem like Moshe thought in that way. It seems like Moshe Rabbeinu, he was the ultimate teacher. And what is a teacher? What is the role of a teacher is not only to provide a role model, and certainly not only to tell you what to do, but to actually educate you until you are lifted up from the inside, until what the teacher knows, now you know, what the teacher sees, now you see, what the teacher values, now you value. So that was a long process, very turbulent. I also, you just, in this conversation, I'm just getting such a more empathy for Moshe's position also, like, it was so hard, like, the people gave him so much trouble, but he started with very difficult material, and that was on God. That was completely 100% on God. And Moshe was always about transformation, even when he accepted the Erev Rav against divine advice into the Jewish people. He wanted everyone to be elevated and everything to be elevated. That's why he's Moshe. It's interesting, in Moshe, it comes from being drawn from the water, but I think maybe also in this case, it means that all potential is drawn from the water of the Or Ein Sof, that every potential should come into fruition. So ultimately, you could look at in everything in life, and certainly everything in the Torah, you can look from so many different perspectives, and they can all be true from their perspective. It depends on where you're looking from. But ultimately, Moshe was there as an advocate for the Jewish people. He was an educator, he was a teacher, he was a leader, he was a faithful shepherd, and he was an advocate who said, if you're not going to include them, erase me too. That's the essence of Moshe.
What do you think he was trying to educate the Jewish people by hitting the rock as opposed to speaking to the rock?
Well, first of all, one opinion at least says that that provided that hitting the rock represented or embedded the necessity to toil in the Torah rather than just to receive. Again, like the paradigm of the Garden of Eden, the more you toil, the more your own light comes out. But again, it seems like Moshe was, at least this is what what I was taught a long time ago I've heard this a number of times, not just once, but that Moshe was trying not to make the Jewish people look bad. He was trying to protect them by showing that, like it says, the commentaries say that one of the reasons Hashem was upset with Moshe was because he could have been a lesson for the Jews, right? If he'd spoken to a stupid rock and the rock listened to him, then the Jewish people would have thought, well, we're people, we're Jews, we better listen. But it was almost like the opposite, that Moshe saw that the problems that the people had, seeing, understanding, believing, listening, which is, again, understandable. It's understandable from a human standpoint, so much so. And so he was protecting the people, at least from this perspective, by hitting the rock so that God couldn't say, even the rock listened to me, and you people, you can't listen to me. So it's like that, that's setting the bar a little lower. That to me,
that works very, very well with next week's parasha as well. When we come to Balak, it's the same message there. But
well, and that makes sense that that's why he would have you, when you said it's a setup. The Alter Rebbe talks about the Garden of Eden as being a setup, like it says in Kapitel 66, Nora Alila B'nei Adam, that God foisted this terrible plot on man, and the Alter Rebbe says this is the setup of putting the snake in the garden and pretending that it wasn't supposed to happen when actually God planned the whole thing. So I think you're onto something there, and that fits very much with this, this opinion that is so much in my head. Sorry.
Well, I want to share with you something that I first heard from Lord Jonathan Sacks a few years ago, and then I saw it in the Alshech, and that is that, when you have a child and you want to discipline the child doesn't respond to words. It responds to a physical hit or whatever.
Right.
But as the child matures and grows, then the hit isn't appropriate. It's more speaking. You speak them with English. And so you have the situation in the first case where the Jewish people came out of Egypt and they were just slaves, a bunch of slaves. What do slaves respond to? Beatings. And that's what they understood. And therefore, Moshe hit the rock as that form of miracle. But now, 38 years later on, when the Jewish people have matured, they need to be educated with words, and that's perhaps why God wanted to use the word. But I want to share with you another idea which was very powerful, and that is that the Alshech compares the written law to this world and the oral law to Olam Haba. And he compares the written law to food and the oral law to water. And his suggestion is that even a spiritual food like manna has to have water in order to make it digestible. And he's suggesting that the lesson to us today is that the oral law, although we were at Mount Sinai, apparently the Jewish people were happy to accept the written law, but had to have the mountain over our heads to accept the oral law. God is saying to us, without oral law, it's like not being able to drink, and the physical food is of no value to you. And you must combine that. The oral law is what gives the palate and the ability to digest the written law. And I think that was a very powerful idea and the Alshech extends it by bringing the Kabbalah and saying that, had Moshe and Aaron even discussed one idea of halacha in front of the rock, it would have produced the water. And
Wow.
because had he done that, there wouldn't have been any machloket for halachot in all the sages, with all the sages after that, which is a very, very powerful idea.
Yeah.
So this idea of hitting versus speaking is very it's a very big matter. It's not a small matter. And I'm curious that the rock, I'm thinking from the perspective of the rock, the rock has been instructed to produce water as a result of the speaking. And all of a sudden he's being hit and only a trickle of water comes out because he's not quite sure what to do. Does he listen to Moshe or does he listen to God?
Right.
So Moshe has to hit it twice before the water comes out. I thought that was quite interesting. But huge punishment to Moshe. I mean, lifelong ambition to go to Eretz Israel under any circumstances. If I can't go in there as a leader of the Jewish people, let me just go in there as a lay person. And God says no. And part of that is all to do with you haven't sanctified my name by speaking to the rock, then you're going to have to sanctify my name by showing the people that I don't give favoritism to those that are close to me. In fact, those that are close to me have an even higher threshold to achieve. And that's the way in which Moshe had to sanctify the name of God in the end.
Yeah, I have an emotional response to that. It makes me very sad. It just feels so, deeply unfair. And at the same time, I'm really seeing this pattern that all of it is, like they say in Yiddish, all of it's bashert. Like there's no way that God didn't know what was going to happen. God is above time and space and past and future, right? There's no way that God didn't know every single little nuance of the training that we would have to go through and the depths that we would have to go down. The concept in Hasidus of Yerida L'Tzarech Aliyah, that you have to, like the pulling back the string on the bow, you have to go down in order to, to elevate the deeper sparks. That's the whole essence of Gullus. That's the reason why there was a snake in the garden. So like there is no way, I'm just saying, there's no way that I'm going to buy that any of this was actually in its essence meant to be a punishment, but rather, even though the Torah says that, like the Torah says God's angry about this and angry about that, and yet Chassidus says God loves us infinitely and forgives us infinitely, and not only Chassidus, it's all over the Torah. So like there's a disconnect there, and it's got to have to do with the level at which we are reading life and reading God and reading ourselves, reading the Torah, that, a little kid, mommy's angry at you, go to your room, an older child is like, she's just pretending. And an adult is like, she loved me so much that she was willing to hide it, for the sake of my growth and maturation for my future. So I think that it's imperative for us, honestly, at this stage in history, especially when things are so chaotic and when we're in such turbulent and transformational times, we're in times of redemption. It's imperative for us to look beyond this reward and punishment. That's all the tree of light, of knowledge of good and evil. And I'm not saying that the laws don't matter and that good and I would never say that, the opposite, but in our terms of our relationship, view ourselves with love and compassion, and to imagine and to assume and to align with this deeper truth that God adores each and every one of us and knows what he's put us through. And that everything is only part of the education, and that it hurts the parent to educate the child. And I'm going to start crying, that in a way that isn't overtly.
I feel you. I hear you, and I hear the truth in it. I really do. And I think it's important for us to look at Hashem's perspective as a parent. And what would you do as a parent? You know, I was with a group of people yesterday from Carmiel, and I said, you know, what's the difference between a baby and an adult? The baby wants everything. Give me.
Right.
And what's the role of the parent? And one of the parents said, to give to the child. I said, no, the role of the parent is to teach them the art of delayed gratification.
Exactly.
And so, you know, it is beautiful the way you expressed it, that Hashem has to withhold the goodness that he wants to give to us for our own benefit, for our own purpose.
Even Moshe, like I've heard, you know, there's a tradition in Chabad that if a Rebbe would be the central soul, I'm sure it applies to Moshe also, would actually be in the Holy Land, the Gullus couldn't continue, but the Gullus had to continue. As painful as it is. I'm sorry if I spoke over you. I didn't mean to, but I just want to say, I feel like I need to say that in our times, it is imperative that we find the trust that God adores us. And the great thing is that's bitachon, and that finding that trust in a relaxed way and aligning with it for real in our bodies, it's an absolute guarantee that God, that regardless, it hacks the system. It means the education is done because we've become so close. We broke through the illusion. There's nothing more important than that. I hope I'm not diverting from the questions, but
no, not at all. And I think it links in with what I wanted to say at the end, which was basically, you know, I think it was chapter 21, that the Jewish people finally appreciated and loved the essence of Miriam by breaking into a song as Yashir.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's beautiful. You know, that's the highest version of gratitude is song. And it's almost, I have visions of them bringing the tambourines out again, you know, in her honor. But okay, so we're coming to the end of our allotted time, but I wanted to ask you, is there anything else, as you read the parasha, is there anything else that you are bursting to share with us as a lesson to us? I mean, you've given us so many insights and beautiful wisdom. Is there anything that we haven't touched on?
I'll only say something about the idea that you just expressed about song, or you could say song and dance. It's so interesting that it's called Mei Mariva, you know, the waters of strife, of quarrel. What does that really mean? That means everybody's separate. Like you said before, you know, if they were honoring Miriam, they would have come in an orderly way as a group, but they all came separate, each man for himself, each one against the other. And the song is the opposite of that. Dance is too, but that ultimately is the essence of the consciousness and the vision of Miriam, that when people are singing, they don't have to force themselves to be together with other people. They don't have to control themselves and fight against themselves and get that heat down. It's a natural, what happens, the heart opens and the soul opens and the body, you know, the flow of the body opens, and automatically every person who's with you is only enhancing you. It's the core opposite of sinat chinam, you know, where the something that someone else is or has diminishes you and causes, you know, that baseless strife with them. It's the opposite. It's the core healing for everything that ails us, with an automatic, organic oneness and union where every other person is just a blessing to me, makes me greater, and I make them greater. And it's not at any cost to our own individuality, but just the full expression of it.
Amen. I want to share with you a teaching that I learned from my Rabbi Akiva Tatz in London. And he said to me about music, he said that, you know, if you were to press the letter C and your neighbor was to press another C, there's no music, it's just the same.
Right.
But if you press a C and they press an E, all of a sudden you have harmony, and that is music. And what's beautiful, it just emphasizes what you said. It's not that one is better than the other, it's the combination of the two that enhances both of them,
Each one becomes part of a symphony instead of just a
exactly,
note. Yeah.
exactly. So that's great. So I just wanted to invite you as a last gesture, if you wouldn't mind, is to bless our viewers with a blessing connected with what we've discussed today.
All right. So may Hashem grant each of us the ability to experience the connection, the love, the wisdom, the power, the miracles from the core of our heart, which at the core of our heart is the level of the soul called Bina Liba, the understanding of the heart. That's the soul's core experience of blissful connection with God. And I just bless all of us that we should feel that we should see it in ourselves, that we should see it in each other, that we should see each of our own individuality and even our flaws, not as a problem, but just as a prism, as a lens through which we can express that incredible supernatural connection and consciousness and power to the point where we can create a vast, incredibly beautiful symphony and bring it to this world. But that we'll be living in these bodies, upgraded, forever, because the body is the part of us that can experience God's essence. But first we have to tap into our own essence. So that would be my blessing to myself and all of us, to tap into our essence and to that essential connection that we have with God from a place of absolute love.
Thank you. Thank you, Shifra. And I wanted just to leave our audience, if there's so many ways they can connect with you, but if you could pick one way that you really would like somebody who's never heard you before to connect with you, how would that be?
Yeah, that would be great. Go to my website, gateofunity.com. It's one word, gateofunity.com. And right at the top of the site, you'll see a sign up for my 7 Kabbalah secrets that can change your life. It's a free e-course. And once you're signed up for that, we'll be in touch. You'll get whatever I have.
Well, I want to wish you a blessing, really from the heart. I bless you that you will not only complete your book, but it will be a national, international bestseller with hundreds of thousands of copies sold and read and shared amongst the world. You've got so much Torah to share with us, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you here in Tzfat, organizing all that you're organizing in our very own holy city of Tzfat. So may
Shlomo.
May Hashem continue to bless you and David, and may we enjoy many more opportunities to connect and share Torah together.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you so much. Blessings to you and Yocheved as well.
Thank you.
God wonderful. Bless. Take care.
Bye-bye.